prospect of many a tactical voting-based Liberal Democrat by-election victory, and from Swansea we'll be joined in a moment or two by the Welsh Secretary Peter Hain. Apparently you can hear us, can you, Peter Hain?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me, Jeremy?
Yep, you're a bit echoey, but we can hear you fine. Thanks very much. Now, Lord Renard, would you be advising Lib Dem supporters to vote for anything other than the Liberal Democrats?
No, of course not. I think today's manifesto launch and tomorrow's debates will show the clear differences between the Liberal Democrats and both the other old parties, and will urge everyone to vote Liberal Democrat.
Peter Hain, explain to him why he should change his mind.
Well, I'm appealing to the decent, mainstream, progressive majority in Britain who don't want the Tories, who are increasingly fearful of savage Tory cuts and the fact that they will not commit themselves to any political reform. Indeed, they're reactionary and in the no change camp on that. I'm appealing to them in those key Labour-Tory battleground seats to vote Labour, even if they're not signed up Labour supporters or they don't like all of our record or all of our policies, but there's a growing fear amongst those people. There may be some have voted Lib Dem, some have voted Green, some have voted Plaid, some have stayed at home recently, to come out and vote for Labour to make sure we do not get the disaster of this right-wing Tory government again.
Let me ask you, if the boot's on the other foot, I hope you can hear me through all those sirens, would you advise in seats where the Liberal Democrats are challenging the Conservatives, would you advise Labour voters to support the Lib Dems?
No, it's not for me to do so, but people are intelligent.
In that case, it's rather fatuous, your advice to the Lib Dems, isn't it?
No, but the real battleground, Jeremy, is in those Labour-Tory marginals where if sufficient people of goodwill who are horrified by the savagery of the Tory cuts and their entire opposition to any political reform, and there's common ground between Labour and the Lib Dems on a fixed-term parliament, on electoral reform and on an elected House of Lords, all of these things opposed by the Tories, then those people can rally to Labour's cause, prevent the election of a Tory MP and thereby prevent the election of a right-wing Tory government under David Cameron. Now, so that's in their hands, and I think increasingly people are fearful of a Tory government are beginning to think about that.
From a leftist perspective, Lord Renard, you can see that makes a great deal of sense, but presumably the difficulty is for you is that there are a very large number of Liberal Democrats who could live quite happily with a David Cameron government.
I think first I'd say in response to Peter Hain that there were many good things the Labour government could have done, which it hasn't done. It simply failed to deliver on those things like electoral reform and House of Lords reform. There are also many bad things they've done, whether it's invading Iraq or inching tuition fees, or it's what they've done in relation to the economy. So those differences are very great. What I think Peter Hain's failing to recognise is that in England, at least, there are three types of seats. There are the Lib Dem versus Labour marginals, the Lib Dem versus Conservative marginals, and the Labour versus Conservative marginals. Of course, in Scotland and Wales, four-party systems. He fails to recognise that.
But what is the point of voting Lib Dem in a Labour-Tory marginal?
Well, the point of voting Lib Dem is it's the only way you actually vote for real change. Now, you're suggesting that many people shouldn't vote for the party they most want.
But you're not going to achieve any change if it's a Labour-Tory marginal.
Well, what we actually want is things like electoral reform. That means people can vote for who they really want, and your vote counts in every seat, not just in marginal seats.
So, and you are going to sit there with a straight face and say you have never advised tactical voting?
I've often advised tactical voting when the tactic has been to vote Liberal Democrat, and there are a lot of seats that are Liberal Democrat Conservative marginals where Labour voters, in their own interest, for the reasons perhaps Peter Hain argued, should vote for Lib Dems. But also, of course, there are many Conservatives in places that might be Liberal Democrat Labour battlegrounds. Perhaps actually there aren't many Conservatives in reality in the northern cities, for example, places like Liverpool, Manchester, Sheffield, Newcastle, very few Conservatives there. They would be best advised, in terms of what they argue for, to switch to the Liberal Democrats.
This is absolutely priceless. Each of you is appealing to the other's party to cast a tactical vote in your interest. It's absurd, isn't it, Peter Hain?
What I'm appealing for is for decent Liberals and Greens and Plaid Cymru supporters or whoever they may be to say, look, the only party advocating, other than the Liberals, advocating with a chance of forming a government the democratic reform of this country that's so desperately needed after the trust has broken down is Labour. Chris Renard knows that. We're advocating electoral reform. The Tories are opposed to it. We're advocating a democratic second chamber. The Tories oppose that. They're still in favour of hereditaries. We're advocating a fixed-term parliament. The Tories are opposed to that. We're also advocating keeping the economic recovery going through having not the savage cuts of the Tories, and the Liberals are opposed to those savage cuts of the Tories
Renard,
too. I don't understand his argument at all. There should be a united anti-Tory majority to stop these right-wing policies.
Lord Renard, if the price of your doctrinal purity were a Conservative government, that would be a price worth paying, would it?
It's not doctrinal purity at all to argue for a system, and if you don't have safe seats and marginal seats, for a system in which every vote would count, and you don't have these arguments. I accept that sometimes, of course, people will say, why should I vote for my second preference to stop my third preference? The answer is vote Liberal Democrat to change that system.
Okay.
Labour have failed to change that system when they could have done so.
Thank you both very much, and I'm sorry about the quality of the line from you, Peter Hain. Thank you. Now, by this time tomorrow night, the first of the much ballyhooed electoral debates between the three big party leaders will be over. They've been trumpeted as events which could change the course of the campaign. David Cameron admitted today he was nervous about them and nervous about whether they'll live up to their billing.